Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. So I'm sure most of us listening have had the unpleasant experience of dating, and also having dating experiences in the past. We've all been stood up or ghosted or even mistreated by the person that we're dating. But at least most of us have never been unfortunate enough to be used by someone, not only to save their life, but to make them a hero by slaying a monster who just so happens to be our half-brother, who would never have been slayed had it not been for us, only to then be led on, told they loved us, promised us marriage, before abandoning us on an island whilst we're sleeping to die, with no way getting home, and then they also end up with our sister. I mean, thankfully I can't relate. I'm a single child for a start. But today, at the request of subscriber Ashley, hello Ashley, we will visit the sun-drenched shores of Crete, where a beguiling tale of love, betrayal and courage unfolds amidst the whispers of the wind and the scent of blossoming laurels. The myth of Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos, is one which tangles its readers in the threads of mystery and enchantment. Driven by an insatiable desire for help, Ariadne forges a bond with a bit of a jerky jock called Theseus, offering him a literal lifeline amidst the labyrinth's endless maze. With the guidance of her thread, she becomes his guiding light, his muse, his sole hope for survival. And the douche dumps her and sails off to get with her sister instead. The labyrinth of her tale, imagery, myth and reception, is a labyrinth of emotions, encapsulating both the boundless depths of love and the treacherous shadows of human nature. So hi, if you're new here, and welcome to my library. My name is Cinzia, and yes, there's a slight new setup unfolding, so I'm experimenting with how I feel more comfortable filming. I'm from a far greater distance, and I have a more significant audio setup. Hopefully it's not atrocious. Now, I've made a whole video about the Minotaur, the history and its mythology surrounding it, and its conceptualization. So today we are just focusing on Ariadne, and you can watch that video in the iCard. All thanks to Ashley's request, which is in my Google Docs form, which is at the bottom of every description box down below. So before we get into the myth of Ariadne, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, which is the wonderful Squarespace. We wouldn't be here without Squarespace. So as you know, I've built all my main websites over the past few years with Squarespace because I love how intuitive and easy it makes website design and layout. I don't know anything about coding. As you can see, I'm a complete dork, which is made using other website platforms incredibly frustrating. But with Squarespace, I can simply drag and drop my content where I want. And if you're a creator who wants to expand your revenue stream, you may be a complete insanity like me, setting up podcasts and all this jazz, then Squarespace is the all-in-one platform that helps us complete creative vagabonds, as it were, get all our ideas down onto the interwebs and makes it easy for us to monetize our content and expertise in a way that fits our brand. Squarespace member area lets you sell your courses or classes to your followers. Squarespace also has an inbuilt email campaign option where you collect email subscribers and convert them into loyal customers, all from your website. And the built-in analytics feature gives you insights into who's visiting your site, the traffic sources, the time they spend on your site, the most read content, audience geography, and so much more. So if you want to expand your business or just build a beautiful website for your blogging pleasure, then go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Lady of the Library to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you once again, Squarespace, for keeping this channel afloat. And now, let's talk about Ariadne. So let's start with Ariadne's family tree, as it were, because it's pretty damn impressive, particularly if you're a fan of powerful women in mythology. Okay, so we have her mother, Pasiphae, who is the daughter of the sun god Helios, and her father is King Minos of Crete. Her aunt, interestingly enough, is Circe, who I've also done a whole video on, and her cousin was Medea, who I'm going to do a video on. And Medea has a lot in common when it comes to Ariadne, because she is also the only reason why a hero of her story achieved absolutely anything in life, and is similarly screwed over by said hero. So the myth of Ariadne goes as follows. When her father, King Minos, offended the sea god Poseidon by refusing to sacrifice a beautiful white bull that the god Poseidon actually sent to him in order for him to sacrifice in his honour, Poseidon punished Minos by effectively cuckolding him with his wife Pasiphae via said bull. So Pasiphae was made to fall in love with the bull, which is really just a euphemism for wanting to get it on with the bull. So she entreats Daedalus to carve a realistic wooden cow costume for her and hide inside it, a bit like a Trojan horse, so that the bull would, get it on with her. Now, this horrific union brought about the birth of the Minotaur, the dangerous man-eating creature who was consigned by King Minos to the depths of the labyrinth, which was also built and designed by Daedalus, which would keep the Minotaur safely inside, but also trap anyone who entered to the deadly fate. I'm bringing the dog into the equation because she started barking, and you know what they say, keep your enemies closer. So, King Minos actually uses the Minotaur to act out his revenge for the death of his son Androgeus, who died whilst participating in the Panathenaic Games at Athens. I hate saying the Panathenaic Games. Anyway, so how he died obviously varies from version to version. Quelle surprise. So, in some versions, he's killed by competitors who are jealous of his athletic ability. Others say that he was murdered under the command of King Aegeus, who was afraid Androgeus was plotting against him and his sons. But then there's more popular reason as to why he died, and that comes in the form of irony. So you see, by the time of Androgeus' death, the Marathonian bull, also known as the Cretan bull, the bull that got it on with his mother, was running around Athens causing havoc. So when King Aegeus challenged Androgeus to kill the bull, and Androgeus was gorged to death by said bull. So not only had the bull cuckolded him, but it also killed his favourite son, and that made King Minos majorly peeved off, to say the least. So as such, King Minos demanded tribute from Athens to pay for his son's death, and this tribute came in the form of human sacrifices, 7 youths and 7 maidens, all of whom would be sacrificed to the Minotaur, sent in the way, eaten to death, and this happened every year. Now, one year, the Athenian prince Theseus volunteered himself as sacrifice to the Minotaur, obviously with the intention of defeating the monster and bringing an end to the sacrificial plague that was haunting Athens. Now, when the youths arrive, as they always do, Ariadne spotted Theseus at a distance and immediately fell in love with him. Obviously, he was handsome as hell, and she spies on him, promising herself that she wouldn't allow the handsome prince to die. So one night, whilst kept in the prison cell like all the other sacrifices, Theseus is woken up by the beautiful Ariadne at his cell door, offering to help him on the condition that Theseus would marry her and take her back to Athens. That is a condition that he has to follow. Now, until this point, to emphasize how completely useless he would have been without Ariadne, Theseus had no clue what he was doing. He had no plan on how he was going to defeat the Minotaur. He literally had nothing on him. He had no weapons, he had no plan, absolutely airful. So he willingly accepted the offer in exchange for her help and swore an oath to marry her. Again, important detail here. So Ariadne broke Theseus free from the cell, armed him with a sword, which is a crucial element that he would have needed. He wouldn't have even gotten out the damn cell, without Ariadne. And then she also armed him with a ball of thread. And she told him that she would wait at the entrance of the labyrinth, holding on to the end of it. And Theseus, all he had to do was unravel it as he went along and traverse the labyrinth. And once he successfully killed the Minotaur, he could navigate his way back to the entrance. So, thanks to Ariadne's plan, weaponry, and assistance, Theseus defeated the Minotaur. Yay! He becomes the hero, freed all the other Athenians from their prison cells, and fled to the island of Crete, bringing Ariadne along with him as promised. So as the journey from Crete to Athens was quite long, apparently, they stopped off on the island of Naxos, and this is where we can either give Theseus the benefit of the doubt or address him for being the cowardly cad that he truly is. Because here is where he leaves Ariadne, and eventually he sails back to Crete to pick up her sister, Phaedra, who ends up marrying him and becoming the Queen of Athens. Now, how and why Theseus abandoned Ariadne also varies. Quelle surprise! So how this union between Phaedra and Theseus obviously also varies from myth to myth. In some versions of the myth, she's actually abducted by Theseus and forced into marriage, and in others, it's actually Phaedra's brother, King Deucalion of Crete, and he arranges the marriage between Theseus and Phaedra to cement connections between Athens and Crete. However, in a lot of stories, Theseus actually kills Deucalion on his way out of Crete, so there's no formal agreement between the two, but as always, the motives for telling myths often determined the way the myth was told. So all are valid, and also none are right at the same time. So likewise, why Theseus abandoned Ariadne varies. In some retellings, he has doubts about whether he can trust a woman who would betray her father in such a way as Ariadne did by helping him. I know, how convenient. In some versions, Theseus leaves her on Naxos because she's actually plagued by a sickness on the voyage back to Athens, and she cannot continue to travel. And also at the time, she's pregnant, so that's why. And then in a more gracious, forgiving version of the myth, Theseus is given a pass because actually Dionysus, the god himself, orders Theseus to leave Ariadne there for him instead. Now, the island of Ariadne's abandonment is formally identified as Naxos, an island also called Dia. But because the name Dia means divine, the name is also used for a lot of other Greek islands, so no one really knows, but most go for Naxos, based on some other archaeological and literary evidence of travel and all that jazz, which we will cover a bit later. So what happens to Ariadne on the island can either go two ways. One is a romantic and sweet ending, and the others are quite dark. So let's talk about the romantic and sweet version of the myths first. These detail how Dionysus immediately fell in love with Ariadne, asked Theseus to leave her there, and then he, reveals himself and marries her immediately. Upon marriage, Zeus grants Ariadne immortality, and she's gifted many wonderful gifts from her new divine family, including the crown of Ariadne, which wasn't named before her, that would be weird, a gift from Aphrodite and the Horai, which eventually becomes the constellation known as Corona Borealis. Now, with Dionysus, Ariadne mothers Enopion, Staphylos, Ceramus, Paparethus, and Thoas, and each of whom was primarily thought of as the sons of Dionysus, although Enopion and Staphylos are also occasionally named as the sons of Theseus and Ariadne, part of the dark version of the story. We'll get to that later. So Enopion becomes the king of Chios, a land given to him by his mother's uncle, Rhadamanthus, and Enopion is famed for having blinded Orion and making wine, just like his daddy would have wanted him to. Staphylos remains on Naxos, but also becomes one of Rhadamanthus's generals. Ceramus, or Ceramus, it varies, eventually becomes lords of one of the districts of Athens, and Paparethus becomes the king of an island named after himself, obviously. And then he becomes the king of Taurus, where he eventually encounters Orestes. So the dark versions of the myth play out as such. So in one, usually it's the tale where she's abandoned due to being sick and pregnant. Ariadne is pregnant with the twins, and she eventually ends up dying on the island whilst giving birth to them. Early Hellenistic historian Paeon of Amathus wrote how Ariadne had been left on the island by Theseus because she was pregnant. He didn't want to take her, make her unwell, but she became deeply depressed. The native women of Naxos, in an attempt to ease her depression, wrote counterfeit letters to her from Theseus, which is quite sweet, but she ended up dying anyway, of childbirth. And when he came back, Theseus came to pick her up. She was dead. Obviously, he was absolutely devastated. And he left money on the island for the inhabitants and asked them to make sacrifices to Ariadne, to have small statues made of her, one of silver and one of bronze. Now, according to Plutarch, Paeon says that the sacrifices made in Ariadne's honour include a ritual of a young man lying down and imitating the cries and gestures of a woman in the pains of labour. So basically reenacting her death, which is really quite strange. And they called the place where the sacrifices were held the Grove of Ariadne Aphrodite. Now, according to Homer, she's actually killed on the island by Artemis because of, quote, an accusation of Dionysus. But we don't know what the accusation was. That's all Homer gives us. Perhaps she and Theseus made love in one of the sacred groves of the island of Naxos. Who knows? Only Homer knows what he was referring to there. And then the most tragic, but also the most befitting version of the myth, considering the fate of her sister, Ariadne wakes up to find herself completely abandoned on the island and terrified and filled with feelings of guilt and, foolishness. She sadly hangs herself. But all is not lost. You see, in the versions where she dies, the tales tend to detail how Dionysus, I say Dionysus, I know some people go, it's Dionysos, I say Dionysus, but it could be Dionysus, okay? I've heard it said both ways by my lecturers, I say Dionysus. Anyway, in the dark versions of the myth, Dionysus subsequently descends to the underworld and brings Ariadne back to the world of the living, just like he did with his mother Semele. So the ritual of Dionysus going to save Ariadne from the underworld, or rather bring her back from the underworld, actually go further back, and they're the more concrete story of Ariadne. So whilst most of us associate Ariadne with Theseus and the Minotaur, she existed before this and always alongside Dionysus, so we'll get to this. The oldest versions of Ariadne's story don't include Theseus at all, and the version that Ariadne is actually the most badass, in my opinion, is one of earlier tales, and we see it in a 5th century CE poem called the Dionysiaca by Nonnos. And in this poem, Ariadne is a warrior who fights alongside Dionysus against the Argives and is killed in battle by being turned to stone by the head of Medusa being held up by King Perseus. Dionysus is completely devastated at the loss of Ariadne, so he goes to the underworld to bring her back and makes her a goddess alongside him. So Ariadne was destined to always end up with Dionysus, even when the Theseus myth came in later and her association with Theseus was built. But she didn't know that. The poor girl in the later myths hadn't a clue. She was devastated, but she was always fated to be Dionysus's or Dionysus's wife. Now, the two most casual, common literary references to Ariadne, which you've probably come across, are actually in Homer and Hesiod, and they're both wildly different. So there are two references by Homer himself, one in the Iliad and one in the Odyssey. And we've already touched on the Odyssey one, so let's start there, shall we? So the version of Ariadne in the Odyssey is actually where she's being killed by Artemis, and Odysseus sees her, the shade of Ariadne, as it were, in the underworld during his catabasis. So this is in Book 11, where he says, Ariadne, that daughter of subtle Minos, who Theseus bore off from Crete towards the hill of sacred Athens. Yet he had no joy of her, since before that could be, she was slain by Artemis on the isle of Naxos, because of the witness of Dionysos. So no one knows why Artemis killed her. That's all we have to access it. And then in the Iliad, okay, she's not really mentioned like in a story. However, the dance on the shield of Achilles is compared to the chorus Daedalus arranged in honour of the fair-tressed Ariadne of Knossos. So in his essay, Webster connects this scene on the shield of Achilles with a later poem by Callimachus, fragment 67, in which a Naxian girl, Cydippe, steps her delicate foot on the dance floor of a, quote, sleep Ariadne, or Ariad, which is another name for Ariadne. In Naxos, the dance was to wake the sleeping goddess. We actually see it across Minoan and Mycenaean art and Cretan dances that the Naxian dance may have actually descended from. Professor Keski's excavations on the island of Chios unearthed a 15th century shrine with terracotta figures, some over life-size, of Minoan dancing ladies, one which was preserved into classical times when the shrine became a holy place of Dionysus. Hesiod's version of the myth tells how Dionysus only took Ariadne as a wife after she had been abandoned by Theseus. So Hesiod's version of the myth of Ariadne only references. It's not a detailed, account, and he refers to Dionysus as only taking Ariadne as his wife after she'd been abandoned by Theseus, and Theseus abandoned her purely because he was in love with a girl called. And Plutarch also, accounts for this story that Theseus left her because he fell in love with a girl called Egale. And you're probably thinking, who the F is Egale? And you're completely valid. Egale is a name that is used across many different characters. Nymphs are called Egale, but in this case, Egale is kind of some random chick. Okay, that's maybe being derogatory on purpose for comic effect, but in all actuality, Egale was one of the consorts of Theseus that he just got the hots for. And he suddenly remembered her on his way back to Athens with Ariadne, thinking, actually, I kind of fancy Egale. I think I'll just ditch this girl here and go back to Egale. And of course, nothing happened in that, did it, Theseus? Nothing happened. You see, this is what happens when you men think the grass is greener on the other side. Because you think you're going to miss out on something better comes along because you're scared of commitment. But look what happened to Theseus. He left a very loyal, intelligent woman for some random chick, and it ended up going nowhere. And then he ended up marrying the original girl's sister, but then she got the hots for your son, and then she ended up killing herself too, so you ended up with no one. And the moral of the story is, when you have a good thing, stick to it. Don't keep thinking the grass is greener on the other side, because that lady's not going to be there when you come back. She's going to find herself a god who's going to treat her right and upgrade from your ass. Because who wants a hero that you formulated when you can get a god who will treat you right? Anyway, this is more of a shorter video. There's not that much on Ariadne, and I'm trying to actually shorten the videos so I can live my life a little. I have not been well, and it's because I am going above and beyond, and I can't afford to go above and beyond, so my apologies. I can only go above. I can't afford to go beyond. My health is taking its toll. So my apologies. I'm going to try and keep these videos to around 30 minutes long, but hopefully that means there'll be more consistent content and I can have more fun on my second channel and the podcast. So shorter content but more varied content, so I hope you don't mind. Thank you Squarespace for sponsoring today's video, and thank you also to my Patreons for making this possible. I really appreciate you all so much. There'll be a Patreon live stream later this month and a Patreon video going up soon, so look out for those over there. And until next time, remember, keep happy and healthy, and books save lives, so keep reading.